everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the very first
Hello,
live,
everybody.
despite other
Hello.
interests. I am here with Anna Lund and Molly Dickens, and I will start by explaining how we got here. So, when I wrote the post about The Body Keeps the Score and it went viral, the question that I got more than any other was, what should we read instead? And I was drawing a blank because most of the things that I learned about trauma from were either academic papers or, clinical textbooks. And I didn't think that that's really what people were looking for. That's not really what they wanted to read. And so I thought, okay, there has to be a book out there that's a good substitute for The Body Keeps the Score, right? And so I reached out to Molly first, and I was like, Molly, all of the trauma books suck. Are there any good stress books that talk about like how stress acts on the body that I can recommend to people? And so Molly and I, we spent quite a bit of time going back and forth. We volleyed like at least a dozen titles back and forth and came to the conclusion that we were like, no, I can't really
Maybe one.
recommend any of these without caveats. And so then I was still getting the question. And so then I thought, well, Anna's very well read. I'll reach out to Anna. And I bet Anna has some good recommendations. And so then Anna and I went back and forth for a while. It was like a few titles, and I was like, yeah, but what about this on that one? And we also came to the conclusion that there wasn't actually a good book that we could recommend without caveats. And that was when Anna had the idea that we should do this live and talk about, why do all of these books suck, guys? And so if you're, I'm hosting this, so you probably know who I am, but Anna and Molly, I think, are also going to cross post this. So I'll just say that I'm Diana Fox Tilson. I'm a clinical social worker and a therapist in private practice. And I also write other interests here on Substack. And Molly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Molly Dickens. I'm a scientist by training, stress physiologist to be more specific, and writing over on the Maternal Stress Project, primarily focusing on women's health at the intersection of stress and gender dynamics and motherhood. And just to add something in as it might come up later, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have dabbled in just enough brain research to recognize and appreciate how fucking complicated the brain is. And just this conversation and like the overall drive towards oversimplification of how the brain works as like a path to explain everything, even as it relates to just the clinical space, is interesting and mildly amusing to me. So that's kind of where I come from in this conversation. Anna.
Do you want
Yes, so I'm Anna Lund and I am a therapist, and on Substack I write about mainly neuroscience and psychotherapy. That's my main kind of focus, and I'm not a neuroscientist, and I just try to kind of see what neuroscience can do to help us, but still kind of go to neuroscience directly rather to kind of read things that we hear around and just repeat them. And so I that's what I try kind of mainly to do. And of course this is a very relevant conversation, and what Diana said, it was a kind of realization that really, I mean, I can't speak about all the books. Of course, I haven't read all the books. Having said that, just the fact that something so important as trauma, in kind of not only in psychotherapy world, now it's become kind of like it defines this kind of moment in time, is a zeitgeist word, really. And that the between three of us, we can't think of one book off the top of our head that kind of doesn't have to be 100% solid, rock solid research, but kind of overall the narrative is supported by neuroscience or stress research. The fact that we can't think of that off the top of our heads, it's already concerning as far as I'm concerned, because we will be, between the three of us, we will be a representative of, what many people experience or read or access as they work as therapists. And of course, for Molly, for you is different, because I don't even know whether you actually go and read, pop psychology books, or is that something that, you scientists don't even do?
I mean, it's kind of an interesting question. Like, I think I'm again, like I kind of have this morbid curiosity about some of it. I haven't, especially, and I love reading like Diana's analysis of it, because I'm like, okay, that's why I don't need to read this, because they would probably piss me off. And I think, there are, and we can talk about it. I mean, the one book that I always think of for stress physiology is, just one of the giants in the field with stress, which is Robert Sapolsky and his book. I mean, we all have it. Like,
we are not, just for record, we are not paid by Sapolsky.
No.
We're not his groupies.
Yeah, we're not getting sponsored by Sapolsky.
But I think the interesting thing with this book is, one, Sapolsky's just a fantastic writer, and he can do something that's actually really hard to do, which is when you are a deep, deep expert in something, to communicate that deep expertise on a level that people actually want to read.
Yeah.
And so he manages to just like hit that balance really well. What I will say about this book is that, it's working with the data that it has. And I think we can get into that too, with where are the data gaps and how do books address data gaps or skip over data gaps or just pretend they don't exist. And so a lot of like this book, for example, I mean, the first edition I think was it 2001? I mean, this book has been,
cool.
And I think the most recent is maybe 2014. And so what is missing from this book is the women. Because science in general is biased towards the male body and the male experience. And a lot of stress research is biased towards the male. I mean, a lot of it is on aggression and hierarchy and fighting and like alpha types and that kind of thing. So that's, I think what's missing in the book, but at a physiology level, it's beautifully written and it's really well done. And I think other stress books that aren't written by people who are deep experts in stress physiology, like some of them actually do a pretty good job staying at the surface of like, this is how stress works in the body, blah, 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 super quick. And some of them just go from there and like take it in really wacky directions that they're just making assumptions because they don't know what's actually happening in the body. So that's my piece on stress books. That's the one.
Wacky assumptions where they don't know what's actually happening in the body is what you see a lot of in the actual pop psychology books. And I just will add too that, trauma is short for, if we're talking about PTSD, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, which is part of the reason why I reached out to Molly, because there is a lot of overlap in the way that stress impacts the body and how long-term PTSD
Anne is asking what's the name of the book.
And I'm going to send this out too with links to all the books as well. So don't worry, we got you covered.
Yeah.
Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. So he doesn't, as far as I know, he doesn't really talk about trauma specifically in this, but he is talking about what stress does to your body. And so that's where the overlap is, right? Between like stress and trauma are, part of the
And I mean, I think when we think about stress versus trauma, like trauma, it's in the stress realm. It's just this like extreme, often super like acute extreme stress scenario. So it can have, I mean, I think the other interesting thing that we can talk about, just to add a little physiology fun fact, we always think about stress and high cortisol and high cortisol, and PTSD actually is the only disorder with stress in the name and has completely different effects on cortisol concentrations. It's actually usually lower. So keep going. Anyway,
I love that fun fact, because I do think that people think that cortisol is like
this is really interesting. This is really interesting, Molly. And while obviously, we might not be able to go into the details of that, right? But to kind of have that nuance and to understand that having a sweeping statement about this kind of big things, unfortunately, it would be easier for us if there was a simple story.
Yeah.
And that sells books, of course.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there is that kind of, it's one thing what's sold to the very general public who is just reading for like a general interest, but then it seeps into the kind of realm of psychotherapy and people who are actually working with people, and these overgeneralized statements who sometimes are kind of really divorced from reality, then kind of enters therapy room through this kind of roundabout route. as facts. In fact, I was kind of thinking today, I was reflecting about this conversation coming up, and I was thinking, what is the last, because I stopped reading these general public books because I just, not only because of trauma in general, unless it's written kind of by neuroscientists. I found, so the last one I read was called The Molecule of More. I read it a few years ago. It's about dopamine. It was at that time when dopamine was kind of exploding everywhere. And I was like, this is so interesting. And some people have more, they state things like very kind of specific facts. Some individuals genetically have more dopamine receptors, therefore they are more prone to addictions. There's all sorts of things that you think, oh my God, this is so interesting to, to take into the therapy room. And then I fact checked with a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
And it turned out that none of those statements was even not nearly kind of related to what we know about dopamine. And so I thought, oh my God, how is this how is this even written? Why they're writing these things? Where they're getting this kind of fantasy information? And so this was the last time when I tried to actually read. So at the moment, I'm not even trying to read this kind of, which is a shame, because it would be nice if we could have access, because at the moment it's either you're a specialist in something, as you know, obviously as a scientist you are, but not, or kind of there's this gap that seems like impossible to kind of bridge between what we as common mortals can know about things,
Right.
and what kind of specialists know. And I think there is this thing where kind of people who are experts or specialists are kind of seeming to be completely divorced from the world of general people, especially social media, and they just consider all of us as almost like people who are kind of selling snake oil. I mean, you are an exception, Molly, but I think do you see what I mean? As in, like, they don't even engage, because obviously it's going to be some nothing. And so that's I guess a concern, but yeah.
But I think it's also, even those who are kind of deep experts in things, and this is why, you know, with this book and what Sapolsky is an example, again, is able to communicate, is it can be really hard to get out of your mode of what level of depth do I need to get into for you. And I've had this, I mean, I have written about how I understand the stress response system and stress physiology, and I have a whole piece on that. And what I learned from writing that is nobody wants that level of depth from me. And so that's kind of the question, is where is that balance to strike for experts to write? Because I think the thing is, when you get, again, too deep into it, it's hard to pull yourself out to write to a level that people actually want to read, or don't get lost reading. And so sometimes that's just, it's too, it's discouraging to try. And so and then again, I think what's the graph that you have, Anna, in terms of like
expertise without despair.
Dunning-Kruger effect.
What is it? The
Dunning-Kruger effect.
The Dunning-Kruger effect.
For people who don't know, is this curve that shows basically how the people basically on X axis there is kind of the really a level of knowledge that a person possesses, and on the Y axis is their confidence about the topic. And obviously this is from kind of psychological research, is that more people are ignorant about something, more they feel that they know. And then somebody who's kind of in the middle, where I am, I think, or maybe kind of knows a little bit more than an average person about something, you get into they call it, as you know, the valley of despair, where you feel, I'm never gonna even be understand to kind of connect any dots here. And then real experts kind of go into kind of more confidence about knowing, but their confidence is still lower than somebody who's completely ignorant. And so I think that really applies. I mean, I can speak of, you know, psychotherapy and neuroscience, and this is sometimes on a daily basis where people will. I actually had a workshop with a neuroscientist 2 years ago where I brought him so that people can ask him questions about the brain, and there was people from the audience explaining to him how things work.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And there was somebody who was explaining how the GABA neurotransmitter is just showering the thing, and he was just like trying to genuinely kind of follow what they're talking about. And so if you were an extraterrestrial from outside and kind of observing that, they would think, oh, this neuroscientist, he doesn't know anything. He can't be the expert. It's the other person. They clearly know everything. And in psychotherapy, we do tend to kind of hear something and think it's a fact and then reproduce it and become very, very confident about it.
Yeah.
And, ultimately, somebody could say, well, what is the harm? And I think, there might not be a harm for me, because I really want to see neuroscience coming into psychotherapy on the kind of the real neuroscience really helping us. There is a harm because we are almost saturating that space with things that are neuroscience myths. And so there is no room for real neuroscience. But that's kind of, definitely there is this effect in psychotherapy world about neuroscience, this kind of overconfidence. I don't know how you would call it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I always call it the overconfident extrapolator. It's like you take this one little nugget of something you read somewhere and you're like, oh, that explains that crazy idea over there, or that explains this feeling that someone just told me over here, or it just places this explanation on something that is so far removed, but in theory it makes sense, like in your own
and it's attractive.
Fully understand, and it's attractive,
right?
And I think that's where the writing
that it works that way.
Yeah. And so just to kind of reiterate Anna's question, because this is one of my devil's advocate question back for you, Diana, is really what is the harm of having a lot of writing that kind of focuses in on that initial bump before, people with somewhat of expertise fall into the valley of despair and the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah, well, and because Anna, I've been on this quest to find a book that I can recommend to people, and so I've been reading this huge stack, and I am going to write a post about it that's coming out soon. But spoiler alert, like I haven't really actually found anything that I can recommend without any caveats. And part of the problem is that once these pseudo facts get accepted into the canon, then everybody just keeps repeating them. And so like the books that I'm recommending the most confidently are actually from 20 years ago, because it's before The Body Keeps the Score. It's before all of this stuff just got accepted as fact into the canon. And so it's not, tainted by those ideas. What was the original question? Oh, what's the harm? Right. So what is the harm? So, and people might hate me for this, but I've been reading Judith Thurman's book about trauma, which I'm blanking on the title of it right now. And it's problematic, and people really love her and they really love her book. And I think that people maybe have forgotten the fact that, especially for people who are our age, millennials or younger, or even like younger Gen X, we don't have like living memories of the whole debacle of the recovered memory movement in the 80s and 90s that caused a lot of harm. And Judith Herman was really instrumental in pushing this whole idea of the recovered memories. And so those of you who are subscribed to me probably already know that I really hate The Body Keeps the Score. I really hate Bessel van der Kolk. And she and van der Kolk were colleagues together at Harvard, and he's all over that book. I mean, all of her ideas about memory are based on van der Kolk's ideas about memory, which all of the other experts in the memory field have come out to say, like, this is not how memory works. But nevertheless, like, these popular writers push these narratives, and as far as like recovered memory and all of that went down, especially in the 80s and 90s, it was there was a lot of harm that was done. I'm going to try not to go like too deeply into that sidebar, but therapists did a lot of really unethical things that introduced this idea into people's minds that they had been abused by their families. And there have been lawsuits, ever since then. So that's just like one example of like the harm that it can do, right? And it's still with us, 40 years later. Like, people come to therapy. I don't know if this happens to you too, Anna, but people come to therapy and they're like, I had this bad dream once that my dad did something to me, and maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe it means it really happened. And I'm like, do you have any waking memories of anything bad ever happening with your dad? And they're like, well, no, he's always been kind to me. And I'm like, we're not gonna try to unearth that. So it's like the damage that it can do lasts for decades.
And then, I mean, even with something like The Body Keeps Score, I mean, you must have all the time clients come in and like hold up the book and say, this makes me feel better. Like the existence
it
of
makes
this
it feel
book.
worse. I don't know if this is not true for you, Mona, but I actually haven't had any clients who felt better from reading that book. It stoked their anxiety. And I think that that's the reason why that book has sold so well, is that it stokes their fear. And that's what hooks them into it, because they're like, oh, I need to understand this, because if I don't, then it means that I'm going to be broken forever,
Yeah. Yeah. It also has a really catchy title.
It does. That's a very catchy title. And yeah, Anna, go.
Can I just say, really kind of in all seriousness, you see, you mentioned what you're doing now, as in you are going and reading these books and trying to kind of find what's what, and, is there anything worth keeping, and so that is the kind of work we need. And and so I'm not saying just that because, we are not together and I'm going to pat your back. Actually, it's probably that I'm, in contact with you because I can see that you are that kind of person. It's hard work, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that, but somebody has to do it. And that, I think, that needs to be encouraged. That needs to be rewarded. That needs to be something that, we all try to do. Because we need to be critical. We need to be critical, essentially. That's the only way. As kind of somebody who receives this information on the kind of receiving end, the only way we're gonna kind of get to the truth or also improve the standard is by saying, no, sorry, I have a brain, I can read, I can compare things. This doesn't make sense. And we don't need to have a PhD in neuroscience or PhD in this or that to actually have a critical thinking. All of us can do it, really. And it does take time. And also, I think takes also courage to dare to really kind of challenge the whatever is the accepted status quo or the accepted dogma, I suppose. And I think, that's if we think a little bit about, other than only criticizing, because that's not what we really want to do here, is, what is way forward. One of the things I think we all need to do more is what you are doing there, as in taking all these books about trauma and, almost doing like a literature review of them, trying to find something good, hoping maybe that you will find something good. I don't know what's going to be. I'm looking forward to reading that.
Right.
And so that's for me an example of what we need to do. We can't just kind of accept things as the truth because somebody says, oh, neuroscience says that. Or research says that. Unfortunately, we need to become more savvy and more critical and read and not take things for granted. So I think what you're doing there, it's really something I admire.
I will say though too, like, I don't blame lay readers for not knowing that this stuff is bullshit. And especially because you do see the same ideas repeated over and over and over in every book, it does make it seem like this is legitimate. Like, why would you question it when every writer in pop psychology is repeating the same ideas,
Yeah. I think, and one of the things, so Karen wrote in, fear is the number one influence on human behavior. And I think that, like, the directionality of books and messaging and motivation for, I don't know, for writing the book or trying to get readers to read the book, like fear-based anything, I feel, fear-based marketing, fear-based writing, fear-based, like, I think it is very hooky and it gets people in the door. But I think we need to be able to start seeing that as the red flag that it is and calling that out.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you see somebody trying to sell you something that's based on fear, that's a red flag, and it means that you should question what they're saying. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I've seen a question and now it's disappeared. So I just want to make sure we answer it at some point. Christina, I think, was asking, and what about, there is the authors, right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
what about publishers? And I think that's an interesting question, because obviously this is a system. There's no one simple solution or to the or answer to the question why these books are such bad quality. And because there's several actors. There is the authors, there is the publishers, there is the readers, us, and there's also kind of the whole landscape and what is dominant thought at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I think, at some point, I know we will address it, but I just want to say to Christina that that's a great question. And, that's definitely something that needs to come into the equation, if we want to understand what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's all of these forces at play. And I will say, because I also edited at Random House and at Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and when I was in my very first year at Random House, I was reading a book for my boss, who was, the editor of the book technically. And I said to him, I was like, I'm pretty skeptical about some of the claims that this author is making. And I think it just sounds a little too good to be true. I think we might want to get a fact checker to take a second look at this. And he was like, oh, absolutely not. We're not doing that. And whereas if you're reading an article in the New Yorker, for example, it's like obsessively fact checked, right? But books are not. Books are not fact checked at all.
So why do you think is that? Why do you think it's what
for a couple of reasons. I think because one, it would be expensive to pay a fact checker to fact check an entire manuscript. Like that is a lot of work, and publishers are operating on razor thin margins, and so I understand why they don't want to pay somebody to do that. But I also think the other piece of it is that editors are not scientists. Editors are not clinicians. They're generally when they're looking at a proposal or when they're editing a book, they're looking at it from the perspective of how many copies of this do I think I can sell, which, and, sounds very cynical, but, having worked in that world, and I can say that, that's what they're thinking about, it's how many copies of this can I sell? And it doesn't really matter if it's true or not, because there's also no accountability every now and then. And I feel like this happens more with memoirs than with anything else, that there will be some kind of scandal about like, oh, this person fabricated this story. Can you guys think of any examples though of that happening with like pop psychology books where somebody gets in trouble for saying something that's not actually legitimate? I mean, there's really no accountability, and these books are very popular and they sell widely.
I'm thinking. If I think of something, I'll say. But things like
because I can think of like several memoirs off the top of my head where there's.
I think there might have been some. I can't think of a specific example, but it won't be because of the science facts.
Yeah, right.
I feel that scientists are too shy to kind of weigh in and say, listen, no. They're going to be, oh, we don't want trouble. We're staying in this like ivory tower here. We are concerned about the grants. We are concerned about the research. These people they're just telling the stories. That's nothing. I don't feel they would kind of weigh in and create a sort of like conflict there.
Or they might not even know how their research is being used. I think that's the other thing, is that sometimes when you're just plugging away and doing your research and answering the next question, and it's cool if you get some PR out of something that you studied, but you don't tend to follow it into that level of like how it shows up in I don't sometimes they might not even know unless someone, and even if they did, it's some scientist in their lab wherever, and they might be horrified by, there was an example of this. I feel like I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. And when the researcher found out how their research was being used by a very big name, oh, now I know the example. I shouldn't talk about it, but it was being used by a very big name and totally misused. It was just misrepresented, misused, and like a key part of their argument was centered on this misused research. And the scientist was horrified by that, but that's not a story that's picked up because that, the other person using it in the way that creates this entire universe around this argument that they're making, it's too big. It's too big to fight against. So I don't blame the scientists. I blame the way that science communication, it's this, in many ways, it's like this game, like a convoluted game of telephone where someone writes the paper that's super technical and written for an academic audience, and no one wants to read that paper. And then, there's a glimmer of something interesting in there, and the PR team at the university takes it and writes it up with some headline that highlights this tiny little thing that is a little bit over extrapolated, maybe, but okay with the scientist. And then that headline goes out, and then the media picks it up, and then social media picks it up, and then it becomes some meme somewhere that's boiled down to the smallest part that can become viral. And it's it's gone. Right. It's gone. Right. It's out of the scientist's hands.
Yeah. Well, and I think we should also acknowledge that there's a risk involved in challenging. I loved your word for it, Molly, the silverbacks. It's like people, like the other feedback that I was getting when I wrote that piece about The Body Keeps the Score was like, oh, this is so brave. And I'm like, I mean, I didn't have anything to lose in writing that, but people who have a bigger audience than I do, a bigger platform than I do, they do have something to lose. And even the small potatoes writer that I am, I got a lot of heat. People were really angry about what I'd written. And so it's, there are a lot of incentives not to challenge the silverbacks, and there are fewer incentives to publicly challenge them and say no, this doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Yeah. What kind of pushback were you getting, and how did you handle it? I'm just curious. If you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, people, I don't really understand how, that book in particular, a lot of trauma survivors seem to feel validated by that book, which as a trauma survivor myself, that was the opposite of the reaction that I had to it. I felt like it was very stigmatizing. But people were very angry that I was, criticizing their idol, essentially, and I guess, but people got really angry. There are certain, I mean, I have one, not even a full sentence about internal family systems being pseudoscience, and people flipped out over that.
Yeah.
I was like, this isn't even really what this essay is about. But I must have gotten at least 20 comments about people talking about, how much they love internal family systems and how dare I, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just to kind of throw it back to you two in terms of the topic at hand, where's the blame here? Who's responsible for the question that has brought us together? Why do all pop psychology books suck? Who's to blame for that?
I mean, I think I like to think about it in terms of not that much blame, but understanding why we came to this situation, right? There is a number of factors that led to the situation to be as it is now. And, what we mentioned, the authors, as in, it's complicated because, of course, and I know we said we'll kind of show some of the books we want to recommend. And I realize that all of those books I would like to recommend are actually neuroscience books for the general public, written by neuroscientists who are experts. They're writing about their own research. And then after they have invested time to somehow retell it in a way that's going to be palatable for the general public.
Yeah.
And so these are actually, I didn't choose it because they're neuroscientists. I just went through my kind of pile of books and thinking, okay, this. And in the end, I realized they all are people who actually, that's their topic. They are kind of leaders in the field. And then they took the time to write about it. So there is the kind of who is writing, right? And I guess, there is things that we can improve there, which is, and I can't really speak about everything. As I said, I can always kind of just really confidently speak about neuroscience and how it's translated into kind of this pop psychology or psychotherapy. I mean, one of the problems I see is that we have, when it comes to psychotherapy, and that kind of then trickles down to the trauma as well, we had just a few people who translated, as it were, this kind of first-hand research, original research, into what we then read in psychotherapy. And that becomes now our primary literature to build on. Yet, these people have done this 30 years ago. Neuroscience, moves quickly. These ideas and paradigms that were true then are not really valid anymore, and maybe some of them were not even valid then. Yet, those books have not changed. They have not been evolved. And so we have, in terms of kind of thinking about systems, it's kind of, I would think of it as a one single point failure. I mean, I think it's something from engineering. I like that idea. I don't know if you're familiar, is that if the system is designed to rely on a crucial element, on only one kind of element of it, if that element fails, the whole system is then kind of broken. And so if we are relying as therapists, right, on only a handful, literally maybe 2 or 3 people who have looked at original research, who themselves are not neuroscientists, and we build all our theories 30 years later still on those premises, it's this single point failure. If they have failed in some aspects, we are propagating that error. Yet by now, we have kind of attached ourselves emotionally to those ideas, and we hold them, because if you let go of that, you're letting go of all this knowledge that you have come to believe is based on neuroscience. And so I would say the solution to that, if we think of engineering terms, you don't do a single point failure. If we want to kind of use neuroscience, we need to become more literate in neuroscience. As if somebody, I would say, if somebody wants to really seriously use neuroscience in psychotherapy, I'm not saying they need to become neuroscientists, but they need to become a bit more familiar with kind of neuroscience concepts. They need to be able to go to read some neuroscience papers, at least to kind of try to read them. And therefore, we then will, little by little, I'm hoping, have more of these people who will kind of take the primary research and translate it. Some of them will do it in a wrong way. Some of them will get it right. And so that system will be better. I think we are, when it comes to kind of that aspect, neuroscience, I think that's why we are where we are, because we kind of rely on a very limited number of people who have translated the research very early on. And that hasn't been checked since. So that's kind of one element, how it can, I guess, be improved when it comes to the authors. If we're writing about neuroscience, something to do with neuroscience, we kind of need to get interested in neuroscience, not in translation of neuroscience in psychotherapy already, which is hard. That's the problem.
Yeah. And I mean, I think when we were talking about this earlier too, not in this, but just between the 3 of us, I want to emphasize that neuroscience as a field is huge. It's huge.
True.
And it's complex, and it's always evolving in what discoveries and methods in questions. I mean, it's huge. And I think it just is a reminder that we can, maybe it's not that you have to understand neuroscience, because like neuroscientists would never say they understand neuroscience. It's being humble about and respecting the complexity, and just coming from that point of view, so that you can also have like a healthy skepticism when you see oversimplification and when you see over extrapolation. Be like, pretty sure the brain is a little bit, more complex than that, and that we don't know all the things we know. And because I think sometimes it's projected as this like static thing, especially when you build on build on build. It's like, this is what was found, therefore, 15 years later, all this holds true. And you're like, neuroscience moves way faster than that. So that's, I don't know.
No, I think that's a great point, complexity. And I think whenever we hear that anything complex in human behavior, emotions, thinking, cognition is reduced to 1, 2, 3, it's just not going to be true.
Right.
I think that's one big rule. It
Right.
would be nice.
It would be nice.
It
Super
would be
nice.
nice, but it just is not, because if it was, we wouldn't have this complicated brain, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We would have just 3 things in the brain if it was all 3 things. And
Right.
so, unfortunately, we can either, I mean, I'm kind of going more into psychotherapy, and I think maybe we need to also kind of talk about general public, I suppose. But yeah, so that is a great point. Complexity is to kind of embrace complexity in a way.
And it's
And see what
interesting and it's cool. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a science nerd, so I'm like, yay, there's so much left to know. And
Right.
it's always confusing to me when it's like, we know everything, therefore blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we know
But
nothing.
I think it comes back to, like, I don't think it's a coincidence, Anna, that the books that you recommend are written by people who are actively in academia now, because they have less of they have a job and they have a salary, and they're not, like the things that, that Peter Levine and a lot of these, I'll just call them grifters, like Bessel van der Kolk, a lot of the things that they have in common is that they all have their own institutes. And if I would say that that's a big red flag. Like, if someone is writing a book because they're trying to promote their institute and they want you to sign up for their courses and they want you to get certified in whatever it is that they're selling, and they, like, then they have an incentive to oversimplify things and to act as if they have all the answers because they're trying to sell you that product. The book is just one piece of the product that they're selling, and they're trying to get everyone to sign up because and they've been very successful. I mean, it's like, I know Anna and I both get, emails and flyers every day that have these dudes and some ladies, plastered all over them because they're doing the conference circuit. And so they're like, hey, spend $1,000 to come here, Bessel van der Kolk speak. And so there's a big incentive there. There are a lot of people who are making a lot of money off of these books and their little cottage industries that they've built out of them,
So that is a really good point. That is a really good point. And I would say for people who are reading, including ourselves, to become like aware of these hidden dynamics behind and the power that's behind. And I would say, so very often, and I know you've seen it, guys, as well, is that if the author is wanting a big name to endorse the book, right, they're not going to be writing something that's going to challenge that name.
Yeah.
They're going to be literally copy pasting more or less what they say about specific aspect of something, right? And as a result, that kind of whole narrative is reproduced and multiplied. Now, this author, right, is in a tricky position. Either they're going to maybe challenge, maybe they know that it's not quite true, but then they're going to find themselves without that endorsement, meaning missing out on an opportunity that, many authors write books that never meet any kind of success.
Yeah.
And so now they're going to be kind of missing out on a whole portion of the market. When it comes to psychotherapy and neuroscience, it might be the 99% of the market. And what they might consciously or unconsciously, implicitly, kind of convince themselves that they align with that, and they're going to get endorsement. And so that's but that's not unique to our field, right?
No.
It's the power dynamic. It's how power works and how power is reproduced by this subtle. Nobody's going to be jailed because they challenge this or this theory, but they might kind of not kind of be introduced in this hall of fame of things and stuff. And so there is that. And I think we also need to become, as consumers, more aware of that and not kind of go along with it. And I think, if we become more aware of it, there will be a feedback, because we talked about publisher, right? Publisher is mainly interested about the money they're going to make and success, I suppose. So if publisher feels that the feedback from the audience is not positive about something, they might change what they do. But if we are just going along with anything, they're just going to continue what they're doing. So as consumers, we do have some power, I think.
Right.
In a feedback loop.
Yeah. I mean, how do we change kind of, I guess, audience appetite? Because I think that's
talk
at
about
play
like
here.
scientific literacy, and I mean,
scientific
certainly
literacy.
in the U.S. I don't know if this is true in the UK as much, but here in the U.S., Molly and I are plagued by scientific illiteracy.
Yeah. I mean, and I think even with scientific literacy, it's not necessarily from a you don't know the science here or you need to understand the science here. It's scientific literacy from the point of view of how science works and why gaps exist and why people specialize in a tiny little thing and how science builds on each other and the fact that there are no facts, the fact that everything is a theory and everything is built on disproving. Like science is all about disproving. It's not about proving necessarily. Like that's how it's built. And
that's how it should be built.
Static. And that's how it should be built. And it's not static. And I think that just understanding how science works, that's what I mean by scientific literacy. And I think someone wrote in, if biology makes intuitive sense, it's probably wrong. Like, yeah, it's true. We're driven to oversimplify. And there was another thing, and I think this goes to audience appetite that I'd love to hear you talk more about, Diana or Anna, that it's all about just this perception that we need solutions in books and fixes, and we need books written in a prescriptive way. Like that's what's getting published is really, I'm going to explain this thing and then I'm going to give you the fix for it. Or it's, this prescriptive tone.
That's the formula that sells, right?
So that is the kind of the crux of the matter. And I mean, maybe I'm just a crazy optimist or just a dreamer, but I feel that if we change what we're buying and what we're responding to, because that formula works, that's why they're using it.
Yeah.
And so everybody's kind of, simple solution, just tell me what to do, 3 steps this, 8 ways to change this.
Yeah.
And if we were as kind of consumers saying, well, actually, I don't buy that. That's not how it's going to work. Then, there would be I think that's the only way to change it, right? Because publisher is not going to change it just for the, unless it's like a big name. I think there will be publishers and editors who will really embrace something different. That's going to be rare, I think. But because it's a big name from science and they know they're going to sell just because it's a name.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody who is kind of new in the field and doesn't have even if it's like a medium known, they're going to want something that sells. Right. And if what sells is give me a solution, give me a recipe, give me a protocol, then we're kind of in a it's a vicious circle, really.
So we're saying boycott these books, stop buying them, because if they stop selling, publishers will stop publishing them.
Yeah. I mean, that's from bottom up. There's no other solution. I don't think, how else. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you have some ideas, but that's the only way I see.
No, I think I'm also a dreamer. And I mean, there is a part of me. I mean, I had to quit publishing in part because my second boss for Strauss and Giroux, at one point, she confronted me. She was like, "You really don't like anything." And I'm like, "It's true. I don't think you should buy any of these proposals. They're all crap." But like the way that publishing as a business works is that you have to publish something, and so like in a perfect world, like, editors and publishers would be ethical and they would say, "Oh, this new research came out and it turns out that this thing that we've been promoting, this thing that we've been publishing is not legitimate after all. Let's not publish anything more about this, or let's publish a correction or publish anything." No, they don't. They don't do that, and because they're worried about their bottom line. And again, like they're on razor thin margins. Like I get it. Like it's a business, but ethically, I couldn't keep working in that business for that reason,
Yeah. And I mean, one of the other things, especially again, back to this like catchy title situation, when things become shorthand. So I think that's the other part of this is when you have a catchy title like The Body Keeps Score, all of a sudden The Body Keeps Score becomes shorthand for where trauma sits and what that means for how we like release it or don't. I don't even know. I didn't read the book, but
it's so bad.
But like, can we talk about like the shorthand for things and just, I guess, because I think that also goes to the attention span and what people are craving. Yeah. They just want that quick explanation or the quick shorthand that they can just hold on to and say, this is why I'm feeling this way. The Body Keeps Score,
Yeah.
I mean, they really nailed it with that title for
Right.
sure. But it could have been, so the book could have been better and still to have that title.
Mhm.
So I personally am not,
Yeah.
so I understand that, to me, having a catchy title, as long as it's not misleading and as long as in the book there is something to back it up, I think that in itself, you can't kind of ban that. You can't legislate against that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But obviously people, that's, I think so, is that, to me, that's kind of the limit of human nature, where people
Mhm.
will associate, because not everybody will read. It's the same for movies, it's the same for literature, books, it's for but I think we can still do much to kind of improve the quality of the book itself.
Yeah.
And title might be
Yeah.
a little bit, because in title you kind of have to, I guess it's like science papers, right? I read that there is now more and more a movement to actually make science papers titles a bit catchy. Is that
Mhm.
a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I
That
think
are catchy
scientists,
lately. Yeah.
and sometimes scientists get super nerdy and write something that they think is like hilarious, and you catch
Not
all
funny.
papers that you're like, you're funny. But I mean, still in the writing, sometimes, I mean, I've gotten slammed for being too colloquial with my writing, and I'm like, okay, because I don't know, I guess I'm used to writing not necessarily academic anymore. But I think, yeah, I mean, you can get cute with titles. I don't see those really going viral as much because scientists are nerdy with their cute titles.
I'm just noticing the time. Do we want to share with people the books that we do recommend?
Yeah,
Oh, sure.
let's do that. Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Anna?
Yeah, I can. I'll bring. So I will. Okay, so I will start. We said already, Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And then I'll go in with many of you will know this book, How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. And so this is a prime example of another neuroscientist, so a leading neuroscientist who has taken time. And I actually listened in one of her appearances on a podcast or something. It took her 3 years to write this book.
Mm.
And so, it's that kind of thing where a scientist who has all sorts of constraints of their time and their energy, to kind of take time out of the lab and to kind of translate their research in a way that's going to be understandable for everybody, yet still remain kind of high fidelity in a way to what research is. And obviously she was very well placed to do that, because she is kind of the founder of that theory of constructed emotions, and it paid, because now it's going into social media. There's predictive processing everywhere now, saying the brain predicts and so that's all coming from her work. And her kind of translating her research into this book and some other, and also appearances in podcasts and stuff like that. But so that is one example of how, it can be done. And, she's been also criticized because she calls things like, allostasis in the body or homeostasis, she calls it body budget. She never uses the word that's key for her theory. But things like that, obviously, I think that's something that we need to allow, because otherwise you're never going to be able to write a book that's for everybody. So that's one that I like. Another one that also, it's another neuroscientist that I find has done amazing kind of efforts to make his research more accessible, is Joseph Ledoux. So he's the Mr. Amygdala. And this is one of his books that's called Anxious, but he has maybe 5 or 6 more. They are very dense, and that also shows that, even if we want to read that, we need to really dig in. And I would like to say that he's done something amazing. I don't know him personally. He's not paying me for this. But he's done something where I find that really, really rare, is he's written something, is his first books that he doesn't agree with anymore. And he openly says that that's been misleading and that he's part of the problem, because it's about, how circuits for survival he called them fear circuitry. And then now people think of fear equals amygdala. And he is prepared to take responsibility for that. And he has changed that language over time. And then I think you're going to talk maybe about this one, so I'll leave you, Diana, talk about this one attached.
Sure. Yeah, so
And just a real last one. This one is called The Entangled Brain, and that's another. This is just one that I recommend. It's free. You can find it for free on the internet, and it's about how complex brain is and how we can't reduce brain to one area or to one circuit. That's I'll end there and leave it to you guys now.
when I think about which books I actually recommend to my clients all the time, Attached is one of them for sure. And I actually like ran it by Anna. I was like, am I missing something? Like, does this book actually hold up? Because Anna is our attachment expert. And she was like, yeah, no, it's good. I recommend it too. But one of the things that we agreed about that works with this book is that the authors don't try to extrapolate the neuroscience of attachment in this book. They're just talking about, the behavioral patterns that you see. So they're not like overcommitting, to trying to explain exactly why our brains work this way, which is part of, I think, what works about it. And that's true. And so I also often will recommend The Gaslight Effect. And this is like not technically a trauma book, but I find this very relevant for many of my clients who have experienced trauma or who are currently, in abusive relationships and being traumatized. The Gaslight Effect. And don't worry, I'm going to send out an email that has all links to all of these books. So you don't have to take notes now because I will send it out later. But again, like she's not talking about why gaslighting works from a neuroscience point of view. She's just identifying these are the patterns, these are the behaviors. I also there are a couple of books about narcissism that I like, but I do like this one, It's Not You, by Romani Durvasula. And I recommend this one oftentimes as well. And so, it's like, I've got this whole bookshelf of, I do actually like some books, I do recommend some books to people. And I think that what they have in common is that they're not trying to, explain. They don't have a grand unifying theory of everything that relies on faulty science. So.
Yeah. I already gave my one in the stress field. The other one that came to mind as you were talking, but I don't have it on my desk to beautifully display, just as an example of not a non-scientist who wrote a book that I deeply appreciate is Chelsea Conboy's Mother Brain, and just the way that maternal instinct works or doesn't work, or the science. And it's because I think it just really gets into, she talks to the right people about the brain science. And she also brings in where the gaps in science are and the biases in science. And she just has a very just well thought out view on what we know and what we don't, and what that means and how it shows up and how it's reflected. And so I think that's another good example of a book that brings a lot of neuroscience in, but also makes its limitations in where she's coming from, but also where the science is, the state of the science. It makes it very transparent.
Nice.
So what you're saying, she's not a neuroscientist.
No.
So it's possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that book. I'll check. No, but that's really kind of difficult to do, I think.
Yeah.
It's easier for somebody who is really specializing in that field to kind of have a very overall kind of view of things. But for somebody, that's a real kind of achievement. And I don't know that book, so I'll check it out.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, did we actually manage to get it all packed into an hour?
We packed it into an hour. I'm sure there are things we left out, but we did it.
And there's so many comments that I was like, we should respond to that. We should respond to that. And we didn't. And I'm sorry for that.
And thank you everybody who joined. And if you do have any questions, we will send out at some point like a summary of all this, and feel free to ask the questions in comments of that post. And thank you so much for joining us, for giving us your time, and hopefully you have enjoyed it, learned something, or hated us as well, whatever. That's fine, we can take it.
We're used to it.
We're so cute though. Okay. Okay.
So who gets the summary is the question. I'm going to send it out, but then I think Anya and Molly will both cross-post it. So everyone will get it.
Everyone gets it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.